Welcome to the Minds in Motion podcast. I'm your host, Charles Fatumbi, and today we're exploring one of the most fascinating intersections of technology and culture. My guest today is Frank Williams, co-founder and CEO of Lingawa, an edtech platform using AI to preserve and teach African languages. We talk about the journey of building Lingawa from the ground up, the urgent task of tackling language loss across generations, and how technology can reconnect us to where we come from. Let's dive in. How are you doing, Frank?
Very well. Thank you, Charles. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's so great to finally get this conversation going. One that I've had on my docket list for a while. The reason why I wanted to speak with you is because you're obviously in the middle of building and executing a startup called Lingawa, which has a core mission that is, not only dear to me, but a lot of diaspora and Africans around the world. And so I think your background and just the journey you've been on is really, really going to be insightful and inspiring for others. So glad you could spend time to speak with me today.
Thank you for having me.
First off, what I like to do with all the guests is a little bit of background about your upbringing, the story of what makes Frank today.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So I'm Nigerian, born and raised in the UK. I guess growing up, my parents were pretty, like many diaspora kids, my parents were not too subtle about their desire to have either a lawyer or a doctor. So after medical school, I went as a teenager, realized it wasn't for me, ended up actually dropping out, which was probably my lowest moment by far at the time, right? I mean, just picture this firstborn son in med school. My mother had told all her friends multiple times over about her doctor-to-be son, then drops out, right? So it was very dramatic at the time, but honestly, it was the best thing that could have happened to me because at the time I learned a whole lot about humility and also the value of education and mentorship. Because luckily I had a couple of mentors who really helped me through that time, helped me to kind of reflect on the things that I was really interested in, which were largely around business and basically making money, and technology actually helped me into a career into in investment banking. So I actually went back to uni, studied economics and finance, started my career at an American bank called Morgan Stanley. Was there for a couple of years, which was fun, actually. It was kind of like, working 100-hour weeks, super crazy intense, but an awesome environment of just like really passionate, hardworking people. That being said, I think a couple of years in, I did start to ask questions about kind of what my impact was on the world, and helping to make some obscenely wealthy people, like 20% richer wasn't exactly fulfilling for me. So luckily a headhunter reached out about this fund called Helios Investment Partners, which literally was like, like finance Wakanda, right? Just picture some like super, super smart guys. It was actually founded by two Nigerians, and they had already at that point invested in some of the like biggest brands right across the continent. So think of names like InterSwitch, for example. And while I was there, we acquired Owando's downstream and midstream business, and there's like a lot of like really cool assets and kind of companies and founders that they were backing. And so I jumped at the opportunity to work with them. Ultimately ended up in business school in the US. I went to HBS, and coming out of B school, I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. My wife did as well. The whole idea of us, drinking Gary 3 times a day wasn't appealing. So she went off to pursue her business, which is now doing really well, actually. It's called Beyond Fitness. So if you are ever in Lagos, which I think you will be soon, let me know. Please come down to Beyond Fitness. It's like a little bit of like I think Soul Cycle to Afrobeat. But I mean, long story slightly shorter, she went off to do that. I went back into investing for another few years at a fund called Actis, basically investing in digital infrastructure and hospitality for a few years until we got to the point where we had saved and invested enough to both go out and do the entrepreneurial thing. So I joined her in the world of entrepreneurship about 3 years ago now. I paired up with my sister and a really good friend of ours, Uche. So my sister Yvonne and a friend of ours, Uche, to create what was then called Topset, and now pivoted and rebranded as Lingawa, essentially a social enterprise driven by the mission to ignite cultural pride and economic empowerment through language learning. And yeah, that's what we do today.
The biggest thing that stands out to me is how much your partner plays a role in not only your personal journey, but your professional journey. And the fact that you guys are both entrepreneurs in your own right, there must be a yin and yang dynamic between you two where you can bounce ideas off each other and kind of push one another in your own respective businesses. So that's really powerful. How did language play a role in your upbringing growing up?
Yeah, such a great question. So I think for me, to be completely honest, so my parents obviously spoke, no, obviously, my parents spoke Yoruba at home, but they almost intentionally didn't speak it to us
Mm,
because they saw Yoruba as a way of being able to speak about adult matters without us understanding, right?
interesting.
And like the first thing. And the second thing with them is that they were really concerned about us performing well academically and didn't want the confusion of Yoruba mixing things up too much. And so it wasn't until at some point in my teens when I think my mum just got frustrated and was like, why don't you understand Yoruba? And would just like, her mission was to teach me, but she isn't the most natural teacher. And so she would go kind of weeks without speaking it. And then one day remember and then speak in kind of like parables in Yoruba, of course, which I didn't understand. And so, yeah, so it was a bit tough for me. And I think growing up in the UK was a bit tricky because I didn't feel entirely British, right? Because I didn't look like everyone around me at all points in time. Neither did I feel entirely Nigerian, right? And I
Mm,
think that language element was definitely one of the barriers. That being said, I will say that one of the things that stood out looking back at my childhood was just how culturally Yoruba and Nigerian we were at home. So
mm,
everything from the respect and family values and just like the rigorous kind of focus on academics, I was like very much a part of my childhood. And I think those Nigerian values and Yoruba values were so central to my own personal career success. And I notice now that, with what we do, where we do have quite a few parents who are like actually very keen for their kids to be grounded and rooted in their cultures because
mhm.
of all the positive things that come along with it. And of course, you can't fully understand or appreciate a culture without speaking the language. So because of that, I kept coming back to Yoruba, kept trying to speak it. But for whatever reason, just like the resources weren't there for me. I tried a couple of schools, one in South London, tried an online tutor. But I think the teaching style was a bit more old fashioned. So
Yeah.
compared to like what I liked and enjoyed, I'm ashamed to say at one point, my Mandarin was better than my Yoruba.
I can attest to Spanish as well.
It was shameful. And now I actually speak French now. I learned French as an adult.
Mm,
In both instances, it was just like, it was a really fun journey, right? Like you had like the apps and games and everything else. The teachers were just like really engaging and like really let you speak and express yourself and created like a really safe space, right? Like for you to make mistakes and just like take risks. And so, yeah, that's kind of, I guess, one of the things that planted the seed for us
yeah.
to basically enable people, like all Africans, to be able to speak their mother tongue through Lingawa.
There's an educator who did a TED talk a couple years ago, and she talked about how if we don't preserve our native traditions, our communities will essentially be shells of the past. The language is deeply rooted in our culture, and it's unfortunately declining. What do you think is driving this shift overall?
Yeah, I guess people are busy, right?
Yeah.
People are busy, stressful. If you think about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, like the first things that we all care about is like the shelter and the food and that's like the financial security. And the vast majority of people in the diaspora aren't using Swahili or Yoruba or Igbo for their 9 to 5, right? Like it's not the thing that's like helping them professionally, especially in these again like in these Western environments. And we're even seeing it here, right? Like didn't mention, but I moved to Nigeria about 6 years ago, living in Lagos now with my family. And I see it a lot, right? Like on the island,
Mhm.
a lot of people, a lot of millennials, Gen Zs do not speak their mother tongue, right? And like the reality is that they're perfectly able to get by and people are more focused on the kind of like the international opportunity, which is of
Right.
course far more like as an English speaker, you're pretty good, right? And so there's like less of a need. So I think that is by far the biggest driver, kind of like priorities. The second thing, I suppose, because you do have a lot of people, that being said, who do care, who do kind of like have this innate fear that, oh, crap, like my culture might die. If I don't learn how to speak my language and I marry someone who could be from literally anywhere, whether they're Nigerian or not, but they might not speak the language, then it's
Mhm.
very likely, right, that my language, my culture dies with me and will be passed on down into future generations. And so you get a lot of those people But even then, it's just like, how will they learn? Like, how will they learn in a way that's like actually engaging? Look at companies like Duolingo. The reason why they were able to, they have had so much success really comes down to retention. Like they just like were really good at finding ways to keep people coming back day in, day out. And so like that's like the level of engagement we need for our languages too. Because
Mm,
again, people are busy and stressful and they have kids to worry about and like looking for promotions and everything else. So I think there is this like deep, innate kind of like yearning that a lot of us have to have that deep connection with our culture. But at the same time, like the medium also has to fit, right?
right.
Like otherwise life gets you.
Exactly. Yeah. It's funny because, so for one, I am a user for transparency of Lingawa. I have nothing but great things to say about it, but we'll get to that a little bit later in the conversation. But I can attest to that story as well. Like starting off, being obviously an adolescent and going through college and then early 20s was kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, I understand Yoruba, like when it's said casually and my parents will speak around us. But oftentimes the narrative is, yeah, I can understand it, but I can't speak it. That is consistently the story that is being told amongst the diaspora Africans. And it got to a point where I was like, eventually the luxury, God bless my parents, but the luxury of having my parents around, and I unfortunately don't have my grandparents around, life will start to catch up with you and these people won't be around. And then
Yeah.
who will you look around to say, okay, let me sit down and actually learn. I can no longer blame you for not speaking to me when I was younger. And I was like, I need to find a tutor. There was something in me that day that I said, I just have to take matters into my own hands. But there's a spark that you kind of get away from that busy and you turn that excuse into action. I hope that platforms like yours can make it easier for people who are searching for that language learning tool to just make it easier for them. But beyond cultural pride, like English is obviously dominated in the world. Like, why would someone who is like you or I be motivated to want to learn their native tongue if they go out into the world and no one else is really speaking it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think two things jump out. So one is relationships, right? I think there's one thing to because the cultural pride is super, super important. But ultimately, if you think about the kind of closest people to you, parents, everything else, you mentioned sadly that your grandparents have passed, but for a lot of people, it does tend to be that older generation of people who care deeply for them, but are grandparents who are just more comfortable speaking their native language, right? There's like something very beautiful that comes from connecting in their local tongue. So for me, for example, there's like nothing more gives me joy, like surprising the first couple of times I surprised my grandparents, like my maternal grandma in particular, with Yoruba, right?
Mm.
Like after learning in the background, then like just dropping a few sentences and questions and everything else, and just like seeing like her face light up in ways that like it just doesn't when I'm speaking English to her,
Mm.
right? So I think that jumps out as a massive one. The second one is opportunities come up, right? Like there's just back to the whole like relationship thing. When it comes to business opportunities, commerce, impact, right? Social impact, NGOs, charity, political engagement, opportunities come up when you're able to converse like in the local language, right? Like
Mm.
you just have a deeper understanding of what people are going through. And I think one of the reasons why I ultimately ended up moving back to Nigeria and eventually building Lingawa is this seed, which again, I keep coming back to my mom, but my mom planted in me when I was a kid, which was like this idea that at some point I will do something that will help Nigeria and will help Africa. Right. I had no idea what that was, right? Like entirely clueless. Again, at that point, I'd never lived in Nigeria. I visited, but never lived in Nigeria.
Mhm.
But I had this idea that's right. I think that sense of kind of purpose that comes from helping and kind of helping to create something that's like bigger than ourselves is super important. And when it comes to, helping our own people, and we in the diaspora, we see it, right? Like the income disparities between the average earner in the diaspora versus the average earner on the continent is wild. Right?
Yeah.
And we all who've had the privilege of living in the diaspora, we're all aware of it. But I think it's important that we as a group with our educations and our exposure and access and everything else do continually think about, okay, like how can we actually help, right? And it is important not to come at this with the arrogance of I know the answers because
Right.
I'm so well educated or because I've been so exposed.
Like a savior complex.
Exactly, right? Exactly, because that doesn't work either. But I think having the humility to actually take the time to learn the language and then speak with people right at the front line, whether it's in healthcare or agriculture or financial inclusion or whatever it is, to understand problems and then intelligently find solutions, I think is again, it's another beautiful benefit of speaking the language.
Yeah. I'm curious. So you said you moved from UK to Lagos 6 years ago. Do you feel like being on ground has accelerated your learning of the language and just being in that environment? Or you mentioned before, not many, at least young people, are speaking it. So is it kind of not as much progress on that front?
So language learning is interesting. So there's almost like a minimum. So first thing to say is you can entirely survive in Lagos without speaking Yoruba.
Right.
Entirely. Let's not get it twisted. And if you come without a base understanding, it's actually very hard to, how to put it, to kind of like learn through osmosis, like to kind of gradually improve and like say phrases here and there and continue to get better because you're just so far behind, if that makes sense. Right. And so it's almost like the real benefit often comes when you're kind of starting with a somewhat intermediate level. And then you're able to start working on the fluency and the pronunciation and listening skills that come from like being part of conversations, right? So, I think for me, because my Yoruba was so bad when I started, it wasn't particularly helpful, to be honest, in the early days. But over time, it's helped. Yeah, over time it's helped. It's just more access, right? So if one is intentional and putting the effort in to learn, being in this kind of like potentially immersive environment. And again, I say potentially immersive because again, you can literally go through years without speaking Yoruba in Lagos. But if you're intentional about it, then whether it's talking to family or colleagues or drivers, right? Like, and staff are often helpful because you're paying them, right? So it's a more, it's like somewhat more of a low risk, environment. But it can definitely help.
I have a question about the shame element because what I notice is that in other cultures, whether it's Asian cultures and the various languages within that community or the Latin community, the children often just like pick up on the language because it's so aggressively spoken at home. And I've observed and even talked with some friends and colleagues that there isn't really like a level of shame in the learning process. And so what I'm getting to in my question is I've observed in Nigerian households specifically, the process of me trying to learn in public and fail forward, it can be a little bit defeating. Like that feeling of like you're trying, but it's not something like it doesn't feel good to not be like uplifted and encouraged in the process. So how have you experienced that? Do you experience that, especially being in Nigeria? And how do you cope with that if you do at all?
Yeah. Oh, such a good question, man. Such a good question. Because you're right. Like we are so harsh on each other for trying, which I never understood. It's like, like I'm here, I'm making an effort, just like help me. Don't ridicule me. That's such a good point, man. So I think how have I found learning the language in Nigeria when we are not as supportive as we should be? I'd say one, not easy to that point. But number two, I think I have a kind of like a safety net, right? Like this like safe space of some people around me who are patient and who understand that I'm on the journey, right? So whether it's parents, my wife is like super accommodating with this stuff. I do find that I'm like somewhat cautious about who I experiment with, to be fair, especially, and this was very much true in the early days. The other thing I would say, though, that being said, is a lot of it is also down to us, the learner, right? Like how we choose to respond to the ridicule, because it's not easy to have a thick skin. But one thing I realized early in my language learning journey, and I actually realized this with French, is that you really have to have a childlike attitude to actually become fluent in a language. And I think if we look at how we learn languages in school, which is very obviously very academic, you're learning the vocab, you're learning the grammar, maybe doing a lot of writing, but not really doing a whole lot of talking. If you are talking, you're probably butchering the pronunciation, just like saying all kinds of words wrongly. Whereas if you look at how children learn, especially like babies into toddlers, they take risk all the time, right? They're constantly talking, constantly repeating back to you, constantly being corrected. They're not defeated, right? They take the correction, they keep on smiling, they keep on laughing, even when the correction is harsh. It's not like super aggressive, which is different, but typically they roll with it. Whereas I think with us, there is an ego element, at least with me, that I found where I like to come across as competent, right? Like, I like people to think I'm intelligent. I don't like people to, just like to put me down or to even criticize sometimes, right? There's just like so much negative connotation with correction sometimes that we have from childhood or wherever else. And so trying to like forget all that and just like lean in and just almost like treating it as like a game, right? There's like so much richness and beauty and power in our languages. To not take the journey seriously, I found very helpful, right? Because then, I've just been able to like just say stuff, make a mistake, repeat, always ask for correction, invite correction. Which is another thing I'll say, by the way, that I think when it comes to like trying out the language and trying to like encourage, trying to find a safe space among loved ones, friends, family to practice with. Part of my journey was also trying to help them to help me, if that makes sense. So it's like let them know, sometimes the way I really love it when you correct me this way, right? Or like, I remember last time I said, last time we were speaking Yoruba, I completely butchered the pronunciation of this. I said it again. You corrected me. We went back and forth, and now it's actually stuck with me.
Yeah, it's a real thing. Okay, let's talk business. So you kind of gave a high level overview of what Lingawa is in the beginning, but really take this moment to kind of contextualize for the viewer. What is Lingawa in its core essence?
Yeah, so at Lingawa, we help kids and adults in the diaspora to learn their mother tongue online with native speaking trained tutors and a fun, gamified, AI-driven learning app. We launched as a kind of like a proper language learning platform about 2 years ago. Since then, we've done about 60,000 lessons delivered to just over 5,000 learners. And we are deeply, deeply passionate about making the language learning journey fun, engaging, and culturally relevant as well. And what I love about what we do is like our kids course is vastly different to our adults course, right? Like just because we learn differently, the vocab and grammar we need to learn is also very different to a degree. And we're very much driven by this mission, as I mentioned earlier, to ignite cultural pride and economic empowerment through language learning. Context there, our tutors earn, by working part-time, about 10 times the average teacher salary. And again, that's kind of part-time gig work. But importantly, it's like safe, it's secure. About 73% of our tutors are women. So there's a big kind of like gender empowerment angle to what we do. But then crucially on the learner side, we hear stories literally every single day of how learners are connecting with their family members in ways that they haven't before, how they were able to, to apply to like a job or a role, moving back to Nigeria, where the language was an important element of that. Kids speaking to grandparents in their local language and the joy that brings. And so there's just so much, I guess, that comes from learning one's language that kind of gives me and the team here joy.
Yeah. And currently, what are the languages that you cover so far? And is there any hopes to expand?
Yeah, so we cover just 2 languages, Yoruba and Igbo. But within Igbo, we also do 31 dialects of Igbo as well, like Anambra and Nwani, like a long list of dialects. And absolutely, plans to expand. We're launching Tree, Swahili, Zulu. It's like a lot of Pidgin, Nigerian Pidgin English. Hausa. There's a long list of languages actually that our team are working on. And frankly, I think the top 20 or so spoken languages on the continent cover about 50% of the African population. Right? So that's we're squarely focused on covering those and then growing from there.
And then you guys recently went through somewhat of a rebrand with the name change. So formerly it was Topset. Now it's Lingawa, which I personally think has a nice ring to it. What was the story behind the switch and the motivation? And also, can you explain the meaning behind the Lingawa name?
Yep. So, I mean, Topset as a name was very much rooted in our beginnings as a company, which was academic edtech, right? Okay. So there's a British curriculum thing in the UK. If you were learning any particular subject, oftentimes there would be different sets depending on how well you're kind of performing or ranking. Right. So as a kid, you always aspire to be in the top set. Obviously, that means absolutely nothing when you think about our mission to ignite cultural pride and economic empowerment through language learning. So we did a massive brainstorming exercise looking at, like a ton of different languages, Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, Swahili, etc. And I'm trying to think through, ways to kind of authentically represent what it is that we stand for, and the fact that we are ultimately trying to help people connect with their culture and take ownership, right, of their culture and their language. And Lingawa essentially is a blend of linguistics, it's a linguistics language, and wa, which means our in Yoruba. So it's our language.
Kudos. Excellent. Excellent. I love hearing that kind of process. So yeah, walk me through like the idea. How did you get the business off the ground in terms of solidifying the idea, building the team, and then even finding your first customers?
Well, so if we focus on Lingawa as it is today, the language learning platform, and how we started in the early days, we already had this business, the tutoring business. We had at that point in time, several hundred customers who were learning maths and science and other languages with us. We realized that model wasn't working for various reasons. And we kind of had this like matrix where we were talking to dozens of people, if not hundreds of people in the education space, right? So parents in the UK, US, Canada, Nigeria, students, school owners, ed tech investors, just trying to understand where people's pain points were. And ultimately, we realized that you kind of had this beautiful blend with the model that we have today, where one, it is a large market, right? So you have about 20 million Africans in the diaspora, about half don't speak their mother tongue. And so all we really had to believe is that we'd be able to reach 1.5% of them to build a $100 million revenue business. Right? So the scale was there. Two, we really needed founder market or founder product fit, right? Because we needed something, or we wanted to build something where we as a founding team had an edge, right? And I think with what we're doing today, my sister and I, born and raised in the diaspora, Uche, our CTO, similarly lived in the diaspora for a while, complementary in the sense that, I'd helped founders to scale and exit businesses valued at about $2 billion today. So very much part of that kind of like strategic thinking and operational thinking in terms of for building companies. My sister, Yvonne, has been an educator for 15 years. She's like deeply passionate. In fact, she had kids who wanted her like private tutoring maths lessons on their birthdays, which is pretty much unheard of as far as my childhood was concerned. And then three, Uche is our CTO, full stack developer whose last startup is still used by some of Africa's biggest companies across hundreds of locations today, right? So that was also important to us too. And of course, like the language learning element is so central to our journeys, where I learned languages to business fluency as an adult, and had a deep frustration of why I wasn't able to do it with my own personal mother tongue, right? So we had the problem. And then finally, it was something that we were able to test very quickly, because we already had, so we built our student tutor marketplace in-house, right? So Uche, our CTO, built this kind of like platform where students and tutors were able to match online. And we already had that live from our academic or K-12 edtech business. And so modifying that for language learning wasn't a whole lot of work. And then we figured there'd be a quick way for us to launch an MVP when it came to the curriculum and resources, and just basically put something together quickly, throw it out there as a true MVP, and just like start testing, right? And see where people's pain points are. For any founders out there, if you haven't read The Lean Startup, I strongly recommend it. It's the idea of kind of build, measure, learn, right? So like you build your MVP, put it out there. As you're putting it out there, you have a clear idea of what your kind of assumptions are, but particularly when it comes to your growth hypothesis, how you're going to grow, and your value hypothesis, how you're going to deliver value and retain users. You measure, so build and measure. So you measure to see how the reality stacks up against what you actually thought, how you thought it would. And then you learn, right? So we continue to learn and iterate, and then you tweak and build more, and you can kind of like continue going along that cycle. And that's truly kind of how Lingawa started. We had a very lean team in the early days. I think I'm proud to say that we built the tech and the curriculum and the resources in-house. Because what that means is that we're able to be very kind of culturally relevant, right? It's not just like we're taking some kind of curriculum or like learning pathway off the shelf. from other European languages or whatever. I know this is like truly built from the ground up, and we're able to, rather than again that academic way of learning where it's like a whole lot of writing and reading, which is obviously very important, but like a big focus on vocab and grammar only. The way that we built our curriculum is such that we get people speaking right from the first lesson, learn phrases that they can actually then go and start testing out with their family members and starting to get reactions, and then have that like kind of that positive reinforcement, that loop from not just learning stuff in class, but like learning stuff that you're able to go out to the world and use, and then keep on practicing that way.
Yeah. What was the process and experience for raising capital to even fund something like this?
Yeah. So I think one of the things I am truly, truly, truly grateful for is the friends and family that we have who backed us in the early days, because they really had no idea whether this was going to work or not. I think a lot of them backed us as founders more than anything else. Quite a few of them were friends from my former life, right? People in finance or people in tech or whatever else who a lot of the time wrote small checks, right? We're talking kind of 5 to 20K checks, some even less, to be honest, in the early days. We had some angels who came in with more, but that was crucial. I think we raised more than I'd say most founders do, from at least here in Nigeria, from our angel network, right? So we initially raised about $300,000 from friends and family and friends of friends as well. And ultimately, that was really helpful for us to then go and raise more institutional money, because they saw the traction, and they I guess saw that, okay, like the guys who know you intimately and worked with you trust you enough to give you their savings. And so there might be something here. And then we went on to kind of raise another 800K or so from VCs and a couple of larger companies like Google and MasterCard Foundation, and an American accelerator program, Techstars, also backed us as well. So, but yeah, truly along the journey, it's not been easy, to be honest. But the fundraising journey hasn't always been as easy as I thought it would be, particularly given that we started this in mid 2022, right? So this is basically 2021, very easy to raise money in tech, especially post-COVID, pretty much zero, if not negative interest rates meant that there was like a lot of cheap money, right? Pouring into equity capital markets. So think, publicly listed companies, and that trickled all the way down to VCs, all the way down to early stage as well. And what that meant is that a lot of my friends had raised a ton of money off, very simple decks, right? Just like an idea, no traction, $3 million, boom, close within weeks. And so my naive self, with my wife and child in early 2022 thought, well, it's probably going to be straightforward, right? Like, look at my CV, look at like all this experience. It should be a piece of cake. Only to find that like the market literally crumbled beneath me. There were two friends of mine who ran angel syndicates, right? So they basically had their own network of high net worth individuals that they had done deals with in the past, right? These guys had come in to, each of them had raised $500,000 to $1 million for particular deals, right? In the past. So I remember grabbing coffee with them both separately, and then within like a 2-week period before I quit my job. And they both said words to the effect of, oh yeah, no, we've raised money for ideas that didn't entirely make sense. Like here, you're solving a real problem. There's no way we raise anything less than $1 million for what you're building. And so that I, of course, go out to my wife, like, honey, don't worry, like it's going to be fine. Like we're good. Only to quit. And then they, within a couple of months, came back to me and were like, yeah, bro, I'm sorry. Things have changed. The angels aren't as interested as they used to be. And so I think together they came in for maybe like 20K, right? Like very vastly different to what.
We told you 1 million since.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you said, sorry, you quit your job at that point?
Yeah. Man, it was more shock. It was more like a genuine state of shock. But the flip, and then, of course, like there've been some investors who made promises, like VCs even made promises and term sheets, couldn't follow through. for genuine reasons, right? Like for genuine issues that they had. And so ultimately, yeah, it's been a trickier journey than expected. But again, I'm very, very grateful for everyone who has believed in what we're building, and really grateful to the team for how far we've come.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. One, you had an Avengers team kind of assembled, and then your credentials. You know how the markets move, how money moves, just with having a background in finance, and you have all the advantages to you. And so I can imagine that competence was well justified. But then for everything to kind of flip and turn, yeah, that's that's tough. I do wonder though, because oftentimes there's a reality that Black founders often struggle to find sources of capital. Everyone's experience is different, but I'm curious for you, did the idea and the fact that you were building a pipeline for language learning specifically for African learners, did that come with its challenges when you're pitching to investors?
Yeah, no, definitely not smooth sailing. I think one of the good things I will say is that the people who innately understand the pain point very quickly get what we're building and have very often backed us. So these are fund managers who have who lived in the diaspora, are in the diaspora, have family members who struggled with learning the language. They themselves really wanted or really want their kids to speak, whatever African language it is, and they get the size of the market, the spending power, the demographic kind of story and trends. They get it. They really get it. I think it's been trickier with the institutional, like the VC money that has no real context of our journey, our story, who oftentimes sadly see Africa as the kind of recipient of aid as opposed to any part of a commercially viable story,
Exactly.
right? Who don't necessarily even see Black people in the diaspora as the kind of like the powerful engine of growth, frankly, within our community and for markets like America, UK, etc., that we are like, but they don't see it. So that's been a bit trickier. But honestly, the way I see it is kind of that just puts more pressure on me to be clearer about our story, right? It puts more pressure on me to explain the market size and market trends, and also, frankly, to execute. Right? I think like the reality that a lot of us have as Black or minority founders, and it's even worse for Black female founders, right? But the reality is that investors need to see more traction than they otherwise would, and it's just a sad reality. And therefore, we need to play with the cards that we're dealt and execute. Right? I think one of the things I'm really happy with is that we went through Techstars, because we did Techstars Miami, and the MD for Techstars Miami, Andre Spirito, now runs Techstars New York. Great things about him in particular is that he is laser focused on helping founders to reach product market fit as quickly as possible, right? And product market fit, different definitions of it, but it's basically that point where you kind of reach escape velocity, where you're just like, you're overwhelmed with demand. Users are sticking around. They're telling their friends. They found like a deep need, right? Like it just really resonates with like a core group of users, which is different from like resonating with everyone, right? Like the idea isn't to be like, it's a lot better to be loved by a small group of people than to be pretty strongly liked, right, by everyone. I'd say kind of like that laser focus, right, on being super efficient when it comes to customer acquisition cost and optimizing for referrals and organic growth, and thinking a whole lot about like how do we keep users and maximize long customer lifetime value and like those kind of businessy metrics. I think, yeah, like I'm very, very grateful for how Andres and the team really kind of cemented that thinking into the team, because yeah, like getting that kind of traction and growth has really helped along our journey to raise successive kind of like pools of capital.
Yeah. Yeah. What are the biggest kind of expenses for running this business right now?
For us, it's people, by far the biggest people. We build our, again, back to kind of, we build our, whether it's the student tutor management platform, the learning app, we're about to launch a mobile app, both and iOS and Android. Yes. Yes. That's I think the single strongest bit of feedback we get is like, all right, we love it, but where's your mobile app though? It's coming. But yeah, all built in house, right? So with our CTO and our developers. And so, yeah, it gets that I would say is by far our biggest cost.
Nice. One thing I noticed too, when I joined Lingawa, I was amazed at how personalized from the onboarding moments all the way to my first session with the tutor, it was about Charles. So because your customers kind of range from children to adults, as you said, how does your team approach designing the platform that feels authentic, but also meets the user where they're at?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the things I would say that we've truly been blessed with is our great tutors, right? And we've kind of been quite thoughtful about how we really selectively choose people who come into the platform and how we then train them. Um, that then, like having strong tutors who are trained to be kind of like, empathetic, so that they have kind of the soft skill training, trained to kind of create that safe space for you to make the mistakes and be willing to be vulnerable and everything else. And trained on learning science concepts, right? Like student-centered learning, and just trying to ensure that they're truly moving at your own pace and they're sensitive to your learning needs and requirements. I'd say is like truly like the biggest thing, right? The biggest like, edge we have, and kind of making people feel like they are having that truly personalized experience. But that transcends, as you mentioned, right, through like all aspects of our user journey, right from the beginning, whether you're talking to someone in our customer success team or you're even filling out the form online to come on, right? You'll notice, for anyone out there who's like, signing up, we do ask some quirky questions to understand what your goals are and what type of learner are you, what type of person are you? Are you introvert or more introverted or extrovert? And these things, all funnily enough, we've noticed, because we're really big on data at Lingawa, do drive your likelihood of enjoying your lessons, right? And like if we're able to match you with the right tutor, it makes a massive difference. So yeah, I would say that's kind of all a part of it. And then when it comes to the actual learning app itself, I guess you would have noticed that your progress is clearly tracked. It's clear what kind of topic you're on, and the resources. We've essentially built resources around this like entire curriculum that takes learners from beginner to advanced. And for every topic, every level is broken down into 12 to 24 topics, and within each topic is different types of learning games and everything else. And kind of to your point about providing for the individual, we do try to ensure that for every topic, there are several different activities that you can do. And so you in your own spare time will naturally gravitate to some more than others, right? And that's completely fine. But what's important to us is to kind of put everything out there for you to pick, and then track and see how we can continually optimize, right, each of the options that cover the myriad of learning styles, ages, and demographic types, I guess, that we have in our customer base.
Yeah. And, you mentioned there's a dual benefit to this business model, because not only are you empowering and educating learners, but also the economic empowerment of native speakers and native educators who are on ground. I think that's great, but I also am curious about quality control. How do you manage and set those expectations? Because obviously we know our people. There can be certain stereotypes that are actually validated with tardiness and just professionalism and all these different things that I think we as a culture are progressing and working on. How do you maintain that level of excellence that you want Lingawa to be known for?
So we have our onboarding flow, right from the initial assessment. So tutors take a test, they do an interview, they go through onboarding with training and everything else. And at every stage, they are being assessed for tardiness and just like professionalism and open-mindedness. Growth, funnily enough, growth mindset is probably the number one thing that we look out for with our new tutors, because they're all on a journey. Every single person, myself included at Lingawa, is on our own individual personal journey, and kind of just like stagnant water, right? Like when we're not continually flowing and growing and moving, then things start to kind of go awry. So that's the first thing I'd say, right? We're actually quite bit maniacal about how careful we are with selecting and onboarding tutors, and then how we train them. The next thing I'll mention is that we collect a whole lot of data from our learners, right? So you would have noticed that after every lesson, you get this 5 emoji survey, right? Where you can say whether you hated your lesson, you loved it, and then everything in between, with an option to write a comment. It's like really simple, but what that basically means is on a weekly basis, we're getting 1,000 data points on each of our tutors, and we can very quickly jump in, and we use AI for this, for kind of sentiment analysis. And typically there are half a dozen main groups of kind of critiques or issues that pop up. And we have training modules that are tailored to kind of helping each one. And something that Yvonne started a few months ago, Yvonne, our co-founder COO, is this mentoring kind of buddy system. The kind of like rock star tutors, more experienced tutors that we have are able to basically guide and help some of the junior ones, right? Like into good behavior. So there's a lot we do in terms of like the carrot, I guess. Tutors are able to like earn more over time and stuff like that. And then there's the stick as well, which is, every tutor has a tutor score based on a mix of things like retention, lesson ratings, timekeeping, etc. And as that dips down below a certain point, they get less students, right? And so they're basically rewarded for good behavior. Similarly, if they get three strikes, and strike could be for missing a lesson, being kind of untoward or rude to a learner, stuff like that, then after 3 strikes, they're banned. And we have had to remove a couple of tutors from the platform for that reason. Because you're right? I think regardless of where one operates, you will have bad actors, you will have people who don't take it seriously. And one thing I can say hand on heart is the tutors that we have are passionate, right? Like they care. They really, really care. And like their willingness to even kind of make decisions sometimes that aren't even in their own best interest in terms of students, right? Like missing lessons and turning up late and everything else, but being so generous to kind of give them a do-over and everything else. It's just like shows how much they care about their students, and the bonds that build are really genuine. So I'd say, I say that just to add that I think fortunately we have seen a whole lot more of the good sides of our culture play out with our tutors.
Yeah, I love my tutor. Like, there's been times I've had to travel and, it's very inconvenient for Lagos timing wise. So he's willing to be up late and like, yeah. So
Wow.
definitely can attest to that. So that's
I love
amazing.
that.
And I was going to ask, like, what do you feel differentiates you from any other language learning app? But I feel like in this conversation, you've been listing out many different points, just the data aspect, the customer care, just the product roadmap for a user that comes on and how personalized it is for them. And then let alone the tutors themselves, like all of these things really kind of creates a moat for yourself. And any other language app that wants to target African languages, they have to compete against what you've established. So I feel like that question is irrelevant at this point.
No, that's brilliantly put, man. If you want to join my investor relations team or sales,
But no, as we head towards the tail end of this conversation, I did want to get on the product impacts. Any testimonials or customer success stories that you've even seen from yourself that just blew you away and like it made you feel, wow, we really have something special here?
yeah. So I look at our customers on both sides of the marketplace, right? Both the tutors and the students. And so I'll tell you one quick story from both. On the tutor side, there was a tutor of ours who was living in the north. So she was living in the north of Nigeria, had 3 kids already, realized that she was pregnant with number 4, and money was tight, right? So the first thought that came to mind was, how are we going to afford this? Now, a friend told her about Lingawa and the kind of like the platform, the opportunity to teach and everything else. Her Yoruba is amazing. She signed up to the platform, gave birth, and had her first lesson 3 days after giving birth because she just needed the money.
Wow.
Now, this was a reminder to me of like just how tough it is for so many of our people. I'm proud to say that 2 years in, she has been a constant Lingawa tutor. Her husband teaches, and combined, they've earned about $30,000 through the platform.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of the good ones. On the student side, there was a bit of a sad one actually, a sad start to the story. A mother calls us up that that she's not Nigerian, but her husband was, and her husband's passed away. And to honor him, she wanted her daughter to learn Yoruba. That journey of her daughter starting to learn with us, then the mother started to learn with us as well. And what that meant for their relationship, interestingly enough, and their relationship with their in-laws was just incredible, right? Just like beautiful. And there truly is, again, there really is nothing like talking to someone in their native language, in their native pronunciation, right? To kind of forge bonds and familial ties. So I would say that was one of the beautiful ones. And those stories of people like truly working towards fluency or getting to fluency, getting to the point where they are just able to drop into a Yoruba environment. We have another one of our students who I'm actually having a meeting with in a few days just to check in, who started learning Yoruba because she wanted a role within the Lagos state government. She kind of studied, she went to Imperial College London and studied abroad and everything else. But like she felt like she was called to civil service and to operate in the kind of like the public sector here. Speaking the local language is very, very useful. And indeed, she learned with us. And then within about a year, she got to the point where she has started the role, and she is today conducting meetings in Yoruba. And it's through learning through the platform.
Look at that. Like there's no reason to stop when you're hearing those testimonials.
That's it, man.
What are the challenges though? You're leading the ship, you set the direction and the vision. What has been the most unexpected challenge from running this platform so far?
This is an interesting one, man, because it's a great question. I'd say the biggest unexpected challenge for me is just as a leader is the kind of psychological element of being a founder and running a business, right? I think today we have about 150 or so people who rely on Lingawa for their primary source of income. And that's 150 families, right? It's like several hundred people when you include the loved ones and people who are dependent of these earners. And nowadays you hear stories all the time, right? 90% of startups fail. And every day you open TechCrunch or whatever article that you hear about like another company that was doing so well that like fell off the rails and just like disappeared. And so I think that plays heavily on me. And there's some moments when, if I think back, especially with things like fundraising or with the earlier model before we pivoted into language learning, where when things really weren't working back then, where, you know, you kind of, it does kind of hit you that, oh, wow, like, you know, is this me? Like, am I failing? Like, is this the wrong idea and everything else? And I think, especially when it came to fundraising, one of the things that I'm really happy someone told me in a period where I was really in a kind of like in a tough place is to not see being turned down by an investor as a mark of my self-worth or the success potential of the business. And because in reality, there are like a whole host of reasons why. It could be a fund capacity issue. It could be the sector. It could be literally that they've had a bad experience with a similar business in the past. Or it could frankly be that they just don't get the vision. They don't see it, right? But instead for me, twisting it to kind of see every meeting, every pitch as a learning opportunity really helped. I'd say, you know, not out of the woods yet. There's still all kinds of challenges that come out left, right, and center, but actually being more mindful of taking care of myself, right? So whether it's like trying to sleep better or eat more healthily or work out and pray and be more centered in faith and spend more time with the kids and family, you know, like just things that outside of work I really care about and I'm passionate about, like that just like help to center and ground me. Doing more of that has been really, really helpful because I am an innate workaholic and I do not switch off, but that isn't entirely healthy all the time.
Yeah, no, that's huge. That's huge. And what you just relayed that I hear from so many founders, similar stories about taking the no's personally until something unlocks in their journey, where it's often said like, every no, you kind of have to be thankful for it because that no just is leading you to the yes that will be worth it later on. And also being thankful for it because if that person that should have said no says yes and they end up being a pain like later on where they don't get the vision, but they're always hounding you on growth and all these metrics and things when, you know, you're not in that stage or you are in that stage, like it can just be a headache. So you said what resonates a lot with people. That no can often mean yes later. That's well worth it.
Sometimes, frankly, the no could have been a yes. It actually might have been helpful if it was a yes, but it was important for you to go through that journey to come to reflect. And I think that's where a lot of us miss so much blessing or opportunity, right? But it's just by like glossing over the failures and the rejection without actually taking a second to sit in it, to learn and to reflect and to follow up and to ask the question, right? Like, hey, by the way, I really felt like things were moving in the right direction, but was it something I said? Was it something about the model? Like what in particular was it that, made this a no for now?
Yeah.
Right. And then, and what can the other follow-up question I love asking is, and what can we do in the coming weeks or months to turn that into a yes? What can we prove to show you that actually this is something? And that just like entirely flips
Yes.
things around.
Yeah. I know you mentioned your wife is also an entrepreneur, which I like. I just love that dynamic. Do you feel like you have a community of other founders and entrepreneurs in Nigeria that kind of helps through this journey?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, and that was one thing actually that I'm very happy that we did early on in our founder journey, is just find great, ethical, hardworking, massive, like big picture thinking founders. Yeah, who are going through similar issues, right? And it's really helpful actually, because you kind of have it's like different types of relationships where you have like the mentors, right? The guys who are kind of like even a few years ahead of times, right? Who are able to look back and help you through that journey. You have like the peers, so the more like iron sharpens iron type relationships where you're kind of like each going through it, but like at different points in time, you're able to guide and help each other. And then you have the mentees, right? Like who are people who are far newer in their journey. And then it's like, more of a one-way flow of wisdom or guidance. But that is also like so fulfilling and enriching. And so I'd say, yeah, we have like a really healthy mix, I'd say, of all three.
Nice. Yeah, community is key. Okay, so yeah, looking ahead, where do you see Lingawa in the next 5-10 years? What's your vision for the company?
I kind of see a world where literally like every African language is respected, right? And there's clear value and appreciation for African cultures. I think the harsh reality of life is, or like the world we live in, is that oftentimes things get overlooked if there isn't a clear link to economic value. And so I think one of the beautiful things about, if we look at the last 5+ years, this like just like the way that so much money is pouring into African culture through Afro beats and Nollywood or fashion, right? And I want Lingawa to be that story for languages. We're doing some really exciting work in AI. Some of the things that you're going to see soon, actually, as a learner, on the kind of text to speech and speech recognition side, which will eventually mean that you're able to, like outside your lessons, actually have that conversation buddy and partner for language learning. And I think, that's actually also very important for us, because we need to codify our languages, and the impact that can have is also phenomenal, right? Just think, rural farmers who don't speak a European language, might be illiterate, therefore completely cut off from all the modern tools that some farmers have available to them in terms of price discovery, kind of climate and weather forecasting, like marketplaces to buy and sell. Imagine kind of like a way that they can communicate in their natural language in an automated way to these kind of ag tech companies for all of that over the phone, right? It's like with a normal, simple phone conversation, what that can mean for telemedicine or financial inclusion or anything else. So I think the big vision for Lingawa is that we extend our deep passion for African language and culture that's currently being born out through language learning into being a kind of like a broader language technology and AI company, will always be deeply rooted in language learning, but other applications where we essentially use our languages and technology for good.
Love it. Love it. And lastly, just for listeners, who are inspired, what is the best way that they can support the mission of Lingawa?
Oh, wow. For anyone out there who wants to support the Lingawa mission, number one is, if you're passionate about learning your language, sign up. Number two is, if you can think of someone who would be interested in learning their mother tongue, especially for now Yoruba and Igbo with more to come, share with them lingawa.com. Let them know that we're out there. Truly, I think there's no better gift than to give someone that direct connection to their culture, to their language, and to their heritage. And then, if you're interested in investing. For the angels and VCs out there, feel free to reach out to me over LinkedIn.
Thank you so much, Frank. I'm so glad we got this conversation in the books. This has been not only inspiring, also educational, just for language learners who are aspiring to learn, as you said, but then also founders who are going through or aspiring to go through the founder journey.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been a blast. If I can be useful at all in your continuing language learning journey, please don't hesitate to reach out.